He ran for president 4 years ago. Why Pete Buttigieg was in East St. Louis this week. He's on the record next. He might have been the most popular person in St. Louis this week, at least in political circles anyways. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is on the record. Mr. Secretary, good to have you with us.
Good to be with you.
Everyone loves the person who drops off a big check, but that's easy, right? Congress did the heavy lifting there, but long-term planning is a bit tougher, I imagine. If so much of our aging infrastructure across the country is in disrepair, then wouldn't it stand to reason that some person or people in power neglected it for far too long?
You know, it took about 30 years or 40 years of underinvestment to get to the point that we're at today. That's one of the reasons why we pushed so hard to finally get the job done with the infrastructure package that the president signed in his first year, now about 2 years ago. You know, the previous administration said they were going to do an infrastructure deal, but it never happened. And, you know, frankly, multiple administrations and multiple Congresses just couldn't quite get there. Now that's changed. We've got this funding, we've got the opportunity, but it's one thing to announce the funding, it's another to actually see these projects through. So another big focus of ours is delivery. We want to shorten the time between when we make an announcement, you know, congratulations to St. Louis or to any community you got picked for this project, and toward the phases of actual construction and moving toward that ribbon cutting where the project is actually done. That could take years and years. Sometimes it has to, because these are big, complicated projects. But sometimes we can make it happen a little quicker than it used to. And what all of that adds up to is we are done with the so-called infrastructure week that became a punchline here in Washington, because you'd have infrastructure week year after year and nothing would change. Now we're at the outset of an infrastructure decade. And these transportation projects are going to be creating jobs for the rest of this decade, and they're going to be creating infrastructure that we're all going to depend on for really the rest of this century.
Yeah, long-term infrastructure projects require dedicated revenue streams and reliable funding sources. The Biden administration right now is nudging American car buyers to ditch the gas guzzlers and steering them instead toward the electric vehicle lot. That seems to create at least two problems. One, it blows a hole in the highway trust fund, and then is it fair that electric vehicle drivers get to use the same roads as everyone else without paying gas taxes to fix them?
Well, the truth is the gas tax has not covered the needs of our highway system for some time. And so the way that Congress has approached that is by filling in that gap with general dollars that Congress appropriates. I think there's an open question right now about what should be done in the long run as gas becomes less and less proportionally a part of how we fuel our cars. Until some years from now, it's not a significant share at all. What that means, of course, is that you can't count on a gas tax to fund our road needs. Now, different states have approached this in different ways, whether it's assessing a comparable charge on the registration of electric vehicles, or a charge on the electricity itself, or a charge on the vehicle miles traveled. There are lots of different ways to do this, and the different states do what they do best, which is create policies that make sense for them. For the long term federally, we're going to have to decide whether we're going to come up with a new system that is an equivalent to the gas tax, or whether to use general fund dollars. But either way, the biggest principle that we're following in this administration is President Biden's clear guidance that nobody should do anything, and nobody will do anything on his watch that causes taxes to go up at all for anyone making less than $400,000 a year.
That's an interesting proposition. Perhaps we can explore that in a moment. But the infrastructure bill, Congress did try to write in part of that open question that you raised, floating a pilot program for volunteers to pay that mileage tax. But you just alluded that states are already trying that out. The federal government could do it too. There's a federal gas tax. But I guess one of the big questions for many people in our audience would be, wouldn't that be unfair to rural drivers who'd have to drive farther distances just to get where they're going?
Well, if you think about it, that's kind of how it works right now with the gas tax too. You know, the more gas you use, the more miles you drive, the more you wind up paying. The alternative would be something that is less tethered to how far you drive, and less based on the principle of the more you drive, the more you pay, which is how it works today with the gas tax, and more just an idea of generally contributing to a transportation system we all depend on. These get to complicated, even philosophical questions, but the bottom line is that you get what you pay for, and we need to make sure that we're funding a road system, a bridge system, and for that matter, railroads and ports and airports that are going to drive economic growth for the future. You know, a dollar invested in infrastructure is a good bet. It always pays great returns. And we I think, were able to convince the country of that in working to get this infrastructure bill done. By the way, with bipartisan support, a lot of Republicans crossed over to work with the president, work with Democrats to make this happen. Now we're focused on actually delivering those improvements that we know everybody counts on.
4 years ago, when you were running for president, you said the country needed a new generation of leadership. That was your quote. Donald Trump and Joe Biden are still the frontrunners of both major parties. Do you still believe today the country needs a new generation of leadership?
Well, what I'll say is that President Biden has made a point of including people of every background and every generation in his administration. I feel this when I sit at the cabinet table. I'm the youngest person at that table, but I look around at that table and I see a cabinet that looks like America. And I'm proud to work in an administration that has worked very hard to make sure that, again, across every way of looking at it, whether you're thinking about generations and age, whether you're thinking about men and women, whether you're thinking about the inclusion of racial minorities, LGBTQ folks, any way you cut it, this is an extraordinarily diverse administration. And I think getting that right isn't just the right thing to do in terms of fairness. I think it helps us make better decisions in the same way that it has been shown that companies with more representative boards and leadership teams are actually more profitable because they're more nimble and make better decisions. I think the same is true in a government leadership team, and we're working hard on that principle here in this department and under President Biden's leadership across this administration.
I guess the question is, are you convinced, are you persuaded from your work with the president he's got 4 more years in him?
Look, he is an incredibly energetic, focused leader. I'm proud to serve under his leadership and would be into the future as well. And we've got so much to be proud of in this administration, but also so much more work to do.
All right, Secretary Buttigieg, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.